Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode 65 of Ask the CEO with Avraham Gatile. Today, I'd like to introduce a very special guest. She is a Boston-based innovation catalyst at the intersection of health, technology, humanity, and storytelling. Named in the top 30 women in tech, she is recognized as a top influencer in digital health, HealthTech, personalized medicine, and IoT. Her career spans 2 decades in product development, technology management and consulting, including tenures with Integra Life Sciences, IBM, and most recently, Google. She now combines deep technical expertise, product development experience, and patient advocacy with storytelling and community engagement at eViRa Health, a B2B marketing consultancy. Additionally, she indulges her passion for innovation and storytelling by working with entrepreneurs as a coach and a consultant. Whether it's helping to perfect their pitch for a competition, finding just the right way to tailor the message for a specific audience, or guiding on business strategy, her empathetic approach and servant leadership has gotten rave reviews. An accomplished public speaker, she has been recognized as a top 10 influencer in major health industry events like Connected Health, HIMSS, XMed, CES, and HLTH. Deeply committed to service and lifelong learning, she serves on the board of a nonprofit, Ideas in Action, and is a co-founder, curator, and program director at TEDx Beacon Street. Since 2012, she coached dozens of TED speakers, many of whom delivered their TEDx talks in life sciences, medical technology, and healthcare innovation. It was my pleasure to welcome the one and only Irma Rastegayeva. Welcome, Irma.
Well, hello, Avraham. Thank you very much for that wonderful introduction and for getting my long last name perfectly right. I can claim that. So, it's wonderful to be here with you.
Great. It's a pleasure having you. So, Irma, as a global influencer in health tech, I know you just started up this new business, eViRa Health. I'd love to hear. Tell me a little bit about it and your backstory, how you got started.
Yeah, sure. So, I think after that introduction, I'd like to take a step back and introduce myself as an engineer, technology manager, and consultant turned entrepreneur, innovation catalyst, and coach. In terms of my mindset, education, and about half of my professional career, I am an engineer, an engineering manager with 2 master's degrees and a long and interesting career in high tech. But I'm also a longtime caregiver, patient advocate, and an e-patient myself. And E stands for educated, engaged, empowered patient. Another thing at my core is that I am a connector of people and ideas and a builder of communities. I turned that passion into a social enterprise by co-founding 2 nonprofits, Ideas in Action and TEDx Beacon Street. After a 5-year tenure at Google and having already been recognized as an innovation catalyst in the health and life sciences arena, I decided to indulge my passions and devote my time exclusively to furthering innovation in these fields. So last year, as you mentioned, I co-founded eViRa Health with Evan Kirstel. And Evan, for those of you that don't know, is a widely known and well-respected social media influencer in emerging technology and technologies such as IoT, cloud, security, telecom, big data, etc. So a lot of your...
They've got to meet Evan. And for those of you who are just tuning in for the very first time, check out episode 40 where Evan was actually a guest here.
So what eViRa Health is a B2B marketing consultancy. And we focus exclusively on the health tech, medical technology, healthcare, life sciences industry. So kind of a broad number of verticals in the overall healthcare, life sciences field. And it's also interesting that since founding the company about a year ago, I've been diagnosed with cancer, and I'm now a cancer survivor. So now I have even more of a valuable perspective to offer to my clients and collaborators in this space.
It's interesting you mentioned technology and healthcare intersecting. If you look at fields like IoT and AI, which you mentioned Evan is an influencer in those fields, IoT and artificial intelligence pretty much intersect every single industry, because I think it's more of a utilitarian industry than an industry by itself. IoT serves serves others. So, for example, in healthcare, right, we have certain sensors. You've seen your share of IoT sensors in healthcare. And then you have, on the analytics side, you have AI, which can then go through all that data and process it. So AI can do a much better, more efficient and quicker job than a human would.
Yeah, absolutely. I like how you mentioned that these technologies are utilitarian. I like to use the word enabling. So I consider IoT, AI, and actually also 5G as enabling technologies for a number of industries, but in particular, in my field of expertise and interest, healthcare and medical technology. And you alluded to it. Data is kind of the holy grail of a lot of different industries and efforts in healthcare, but data by itself, really just collecting data and having data doesn't in itself yield results. You need, first of all, you need to collect the right data, the real-time data, whether that's from patient bedside or from patient's vital signs, etc., whatever that data is that you can obtain with IoT sensors. So you need to be collecting correct data. And then you need to have the right algorithms and the right analytics to be processing that data, looking for the answers. And again, there, to find the right answer, you have to be asking the right question. So sometimes I've heard it be said that questions are the answers. So with the tremendous availability of a variety of AI and analytics technologies now, you almost become focused on let's ask the right questions and then let data tell us deliver the insights based on data mining technologies and all these algorithms, but looking towards answering specific questions. And then 5G, as I mentioned, so that's another enabling technology, just allowing higher speed communications. And as you know, it's the whole new, it's not just higher speeds for prior, like a 4G networks, it's a whole new, infrastructure and a whole new architecture, and a variety of different technology pieces have come together to create that kind of really high, next level communication infrastructure.
And I love the fact that you mentioned 5G. So like yourself, I'm an engineer by trade. I'm a telecom engineer. And, telecom's gone through some pretty significant changes over the last couple of years. And I think what's happening is that it's reinventing itself with the 5G technology, because when we think of telecom, we think of like what's right behind me there.
Right. We think of old kind of what becomes
telephone.
Yeah.
Right. And, it's actually moving away from the telephone handset to, like you said, an enabling technology. I love that term because that's exactly what telecom has become. It moves away from the tele to more of communications, and it's communications enablement. So that 5G technology is now enabling all these sensors, because we're going to have billions and billions of them. There's so many reports coming out there. There's going to be 50 billion IoT devices in the next couple of years, right? Whether it's 50, whether it's 20 billion, but all these billions and billions of devices, they're going to have to communicate, and that's what 5G is enabling.
Exactly. And actually, Evan and I recently spoke at LiveWorks. It's a PTC annual conference that doesn't specifically focus on healthcare, but focuses on emerging technologies, and IoT was quite prominently featured at the conference that was just a couple of months ago here in Boston. And there were various uses of it in robotics, so industrial robotics, and a lot of kind of integrated robotic systems on the manufacturing floor, etc. So we're moving into smart integrated kind of robotic systems. now, but we spoke on the Internet of Medical Things. So I don't know if you're familiar with IOMT.
That's a new term. I've never heard that before.
Yeah, so it's basically a play on Internet of Things. And basically what IOMT is the application of IoT technologies to healthcare. And the applications of that are very, wide-ranging. And also, if you've heard of connected health, I'm sure you have. That's also kind of another term for what Internet of Medical Things is talking about. And what we've covered there was actually a kind of really brief overview of a little bit of history of IoT and how Internet of Medical Things came about. But then we focused in kind of the middle of our presentation on a number of emerging technologies in this field. So actually, it's an opportunity for us technical people, and also Evan, just from his background in enterprise and being an influencer, just kind of geeking out on all these fantastical innovations that are coming out, and whether that's health pods now, futuristic looking things, whether these kind of new robots that you swallow and then they go inside of your body and perform certain functions, whether that's diagnostic or delivering medication or performing treatment in some other way, or these new kind of smart stent devices, etc. But we also spent some time talking about the challenges of the field. So, and as you know, probably from your own experience of developing technology or implementing technology, sometimes you run into barriers that are actually have nothing to do with technology, that just makes it hard to get this stuff implemented or adopted, right? So in the healthcare, of course, there are challenges related to adoption, and there are good reasons for it. There's some legitimate concerns that providers might have, and then there's the ways to address them. And then there is, of course, just sometimes resistance to change, etc., as you see, in a number of industries. But of course, you can understand that when you're dealing with health and well-being of people, it's prudent to be cautious. And of course, technology needs to be proven before it could be widely adopted. And, you mentioned AI, so there's a lot of talk about AI replacing doctors, AI replacing radiologists, etc. And of course, we're very far away from that. And as many experts in this field will tell you, that's not our goal. Our goal is not to replace doctors and providers and specialists with technology, but to augment them with technology so that doctors could get back to kind of the human side of doctoring, right? The human side of offering care, so they could actually be freer to spend more time with their patients and to focus on some of those complex situations and the complex decision making that they have to engage in, and where some routine things could be handled by software, or AI could just provide some kind of additional capabilities to make our doctors superhuman instead of just replacing them, right? So, and when I say superhuman, you know what I mean, right? It's just giving them additional capabilities that augment kind of their own knowledge base or their availability. Back to kind of 5G and telephony and telecom and telehealth is really on the rise, right? So, and you can understand the reasons for that, where one-to-one in-person healthcare delivery will be challenged over the next years and decades as there's more and more population that ages, there is more demand on healthcare, and potentially less and less availability of doctors.
They're talking about implementing telehealth to places in Africa, for example, that doesn't have access to doctors. They just bring this robot with a video camera that a real doctor, they're real, but a remote doctor can then utilize that robot to provide care for these people that desperately need doctors.
Yeah, and Abraham, it's very interesting. Of course, there are a lot of people who specialize, especially in like global health and helping other countries that are kind of far behind in maybe medicine and other areas. But you can talk about, even in this country, there is still problems with access to care there are rural areas in the United States that suffer from lack of providers, lack of specialists. And, telehealth is addressing those issues right now. I mean, there are some barriers also to adoption, but there is also there are a lot of cases showing how it works, and some payers and some providers are getting really behind that. And another area where telehealth has seen a good kind of uptake, if you will, is mental health. And actually VA has been one of the pioneers of using telehealth for mental health, and that actually just that particular technology enables to overcome some of the issues with stigma, etc. So people might have more privacy and have more privacy for their visits, but also keep it, kind of less visible in terms of peers and others that they don't want to necessarily know about their condition. So they're just possibilities are really there for a number of technologies. And going back to the Internet of Medical Things, another point of concern in implementing all these technologies is, data privacy and then security of data, right? So the more sensors you have out there, the more different channels by which data is collected and transmitted, more opportunities you have for cyber criminals and hackers, et cetera, to access it. But then, of course, there could be potential loss of data without any advanced hacking capabilities, right? Just by employees not being careful with the data, et cetera. So there's things to still work through. And
I'm glad you mentioned that, because one of the things I noticed that digital health tends to have silos, and that's a challenge in digital health, because for those reasons that you mentioned, that there's privacy regulations and privacy concerns when it comes to people's medical data. One of our former guests, Dr. Louise Schaper, she was talking about, from Australia, the CEO of HISA. And she was talking about a story that she heard. There was a young doctor that was shocked to discover that he delivered the same test to this patient 3 different times. It was a busy day. You know how hospital doctors seeing hundreds of patients a day. And, he just took a look at her chart and goes, okay, order this test. These are the symptoms, order this test. And then they moved her around somewhere else in the hospital. He comes back. He doesn't remember he saw her. This is after 75 other patients. He looks at the chart again and goes, oh, okay, these symptoms, order this test. And after 3 times, he goes, oh, why did we send this poor woman for the same test 3 times? And, the challenge is that because the different wards at the hospitals were siloed off, they weren't able to communicate with one another's digital health systems to let them know that, this test was already ordered.
So that's actually interesting. You bring it as an example of digital health being in silos, but you can argue and say, well, you're just talking about a hospital that just didn't necessarily follow their patients' records, in real time or well enough. And, that could be just as much of an issue with hospitals' operational systems as it is in digital health. So it's also interesting. So digital health brings with it its own challenges and new challenges. But of course, the reason why there's so much going on in digital health is because it also brings tremendous promise to solve some of the existing problems in healthcare, whether that's on the delivery side or, basically across the board. So to use technology that hasn't been available before to solve some of the long-standing problems. And like I said, it brings with itself additional challenges. But the hope is that we can solve the challenges of the new technology and still get the gains and achieve that progress that we're looking for to improve healthcare for all, right? So, myself as an engineer, former engineer and as a technologist, I'm now working with clients kind of from that perspective, and also being a patient advocate and patient and bringing that perspective and kind of melding these things together. And, because it's right, you can say that everybody in the healthcare system eventually has the same goals. We just want patients to be happy. We want to prevent disease, let's say. We want to avoid conditions that could be prevented, whether it's lifestyle or early diagnostics and things like that. And we want patients or all people to live healthy, vibrant, fulfilling, productive lives. But of course, when you come down to individual stakeholders in the system, then their immediate, maybe day-to-day goals of how they go about achieving those goals is different. Because the patient themselves, or whether that's provider, we all kind of trying to get toward the same goal, but there's a lot of different perspectives and this whole movement of empowering patient. I mentioned I'm an e-patient myself. We want an empowered patient to be kind of be there along with their provider, kind of side by side, kind of solving some of these issues, especially if it's related to some behavior change or lifestyle changes, right? So these are kinds of things that require active participation by patient. Provider can't just make those improvements themselves, right? So
the patients together with the doctors as a team.
Yeah, so that's a big movement now in healthcare. And again, this is going well beyond technology, right? So we're down to human behavior.
And I loved it. And by the way, that is a very important point that you're making. We had some cybersecurity guests, and it's funny because we underscored that point as well. Mm-hmm. That there's that human element. And I just want to address something you mentioned earlier about AI. One of the criticisms AI has received from the general public is that AI is taking away jobs. AI is going to take away jobs from doctors. They're going to replace doctors. They're going to replace nurses. And the truth is no. AI, first of all, is going to be creating jobs because somebody's got to run these machines. Somebody's got to program these machines and oversee them and collect the data. But at the same time, that's the point that, the point that you made was so eloquently stated, because AI is going to free us from all this mundane stuff that waste doctors' times, that waste healthcare providers' times, and enable them to work together as human beings and do something that humans do best, and that's working together with the patients to help improve their lives.
Yeah, and there is no arguing that some technology over the last many decades had caused some jobs to be lost and some careers to disappear. I mean,
things change, they evolve.
Exactly. So, but specifically, talking in healthcare, I think there is so much need for skilled resources, whether it's nurses. And I personally have tremendous respect for nurses from, my 16-year journey as a caregiver and patient advocate, and seeing how much nurses care and how much health of patients depends on the nurses. So I have tremendous respect for them, and of course for doctors, PCPs and specialists and radiologists and the whole spectrum of medical professions. So I think there is such a great need for all that knowledge and all that expertise, that even if technology can remove some of the need for some of the kind of mundane and tasks, there is so much more that is still needed. We mentioned the human touch, but even diagnostic capability, or actually following the patient and taking in all the different aspects of all the different parameters beyond just the age and diagnostic, diagnosis, etc. Right? So there's so many different factors that play or come into play for a person's health. So there's opportunities, I think, opportunities galore. So that's why I'm just so excited about this space.
So Irma, just going back a little bit on your e-patient experience, it's truly fascinating how far we've come with regards to nanotechnology. I recently read this report. I don't know how true it was. Maybe it was hype, but maybe it was true, that there was this woman with terminal stage breast cancer, and they injected her with nanobots, and it cured her. This is truly remarkable what we can accomplish with nanotechnology, even if it's just talking about in theory. But at the same time, it's also very scary to think what can happen if the wrong people get their hands on this technology. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I have a number of thoughts. One is, you just reminded me, you said, well, what if this amazing new technology gets into the wrong hands? Well, there was just a story recently about a doctor somewhere in the US, I don't remember the state, who had treated, so he's an oncologist in private practice, and he had treated over 500 patients with chemotherapy when these patients did not even have cancer. So you don't have to talk about fantastical new technologies when you're thinking about opportunities for harm. And it does kind of come towards it comes down to the individual. So chemotherapy has been around for a long time. And here was this, I'm going to say so-called doctor, but he's an oncologist, right? Who I hope will lose his license now. But he's treated over 500 patients with chemotherapy. I repeat, they did not have cancer. So you will have bad apples, anywhere. And of course, we want to put safeguards into any new technology.
Yeah.
But that's where some of the oversight and kind of right operational practices come into play. But back to your example of nanotechnology. So I'm not familiar with that particular case that you mentioned, but I want to tell you from my own personal experience working in the medical technology startup back in the mid-90s, we actually had a product then called XSeed. So our main business, so this was radionics software applications. Now it's Integra Life Sciences, but I was there as a young engineer, really lucky to be in that role and exposed to that technology. So we're doing stereotactic radiosurgery treatment planning systems, and they were mostly for the diseases of the brain, so brain tumors and aneurysms. They were treated with a really high dose of radiation delivered very specifically to a particular part of the brain that needed treatment, sparing the health tissues. So there's a whole algorithm that we developed. So, without diving into that, but in addition, there were other products like XSeed was a product where radioactive seeds would be delivered to the site of cancer, and that was used, I think, for prostate cancer patients and maybe some other cancer types. And they would basically destroy cancer from kind of inside, delivering that deadly radiation, but specifically to the diseased area, to the cancer, without damaging the healthy tissues. So that wasn't nanotechnology in particular. These were sizable seeds. But that was in the mid-90s. And, because I moved away from that field, I didn't kind of follow along with that technology. But it seems like there may be some new iterations in some of the old ideas, and maybe there's novel delivery mechanisms and like materials available that now could make it much more, usable and feasible, this technology. But it goes to, those entrepreneurs and the scientists and doctors who are, day in, day out looking for new solutions to existing problems, and maybe even anticipating future yet unknown problems, and looking to get ahead of them.
One of the things I love about these stories that you're saying is that if you follow the progress that we've made in technology, all this new technology that we have today are basically evolutions of earlier technologies. And you could you could almost see the trends. Like you mentioned, in the 90s, they had one form of it. It wasn't nano robots. It wasn't little miniature robots in your bloodstream, but it was the same idea. Now we're just applying that same idea with today's technology.
Right. And sometimes things take a long time, years and decades.
Generations.
Yeah, exactly. And what's so interesting about digital health in this particular aspect is because now we're in the age of digital therapeutics. you can develop these solutions and these therapeutics much faster compared to, let's say traditional drug development, right? And how long it takes to develop the drug, through all the clinical trials and testing, et cetera. It's not to say that some, digital therapeutics shouldn't go through some rigorous testing, but it's a different class of therapy. And in terms of development, right? So with digital therapeutics, a lot of it is, software based. So you talk about apps that have some, let's say AI or whatever algorithms exist there that could actually offer the digital therapeutic solution. But in terms of development time, it's tremendously shorter. So we could look forward to some, and of course you can't, if there was a digital therapeutic to treat cancer, I think would be really, really ahead of the curve, but, not yet. So of course some diseases don't have the luxury of having those kinds of solutions, but in situations where digital health could be a solution, you will just see a much more expedited cycle of getting to those solutions, getting those solutions to the public in the field.
Irma, what do you think would be the next disruptor in healthcare?
Well, I think we talked about some of the enabling technologies already. And I actually think that the biggest disruption in healthcare, as in many other industries, will be that intersection, that interdisciplinary set of solutions that can only come from multiple disciplines working together to address issues from multitude of perspectives and multitude of angles. So it's actually interesting. You asked before what would be an ideal client for us, for eViRa Health, for example, or for my consultancy, 11X Consulting. Well, we just had a conversation the other day, Evan and I, with a fantastic entrepreneur from Southern California. So without, revealing his name or the company, it's just something that he started from his own experience and family experience with cancer and his experience with genomics and DNA sequencing, etc. And through kind of a number of iterations, it really evolved into what could potentially be really a platform for patient-centric healthcare and data collection and exchange, and could become kind of like a new standard that could address some of the interoperability issues, etc. So here we're talking about somebody who, started in a particular, niche field, let's say, genomics or DNA sequencing, etc. And through a series of kind of iterations and pivots and maybe taking on additional challenges, had now evolved into something much bigger than that. So we love working with entrepreneurs like that, somebody who has a vision and also not afraid to roll up their sleeves and actually do the work. But the interdisciplinary approach, I think, is where some of the biggest gains will be.
And talking about e-health, if there's one field in e-health that I wish would be developed, that's e-dentistry. I still, I can't figure out why in the 21st century they still drill holes in teeth.
Well, I don't know if we could ever, treat cavities without actually having to hear that horrible drill sound. But I have seen myself, so I have a first account, information in terms of how dentistry has moved along in the last, number of decades, right? So I was just at my dentist's office a couple of weeks ago, and they were able to do, listen to this, not just like panoramic x-ray, they were able to do a 3D CT scan of my teeth, my jaw, and then in a matter of minutes, they could see 3D image of every single, structure in my mouth that they could zoom in and manipulate and see exactly what's going on. So, and of course, I know, dentists now can to create their own crowns and things right there in their office without need to send to labs. So there's been some advances, but I don't know if
I think augmented reality is gonna be really helpful for dentistry to take what you just described to the next level.
Yeah, absolutely. And then, of course, if we're all living eventually, years or decades down the road, if we're all living in virtual reality, then who cares what kind of teeth we have? Maybe we don't even need dentists.
That's right. You just create new one. So, Irma, you've worked with many entrepreneurs and coached them. There's a statistic that many small businesses fail within the first year of business.
Of course.
Where do entrepreneurs go wrong?
Well, so there's really, I think there's really a number of areas, many things that could go wrong when you're starting your own business or developing a product, etc. But it's probably two main areas. I think financially, it's probably an area where there's a biggest risk to entrepreneurs' kind of personal fortunes, especially if they're self-financing their businesses or if they're using kind of friends and family funding. That becomes even probably more nerve-wracking when you're spending your family's money. And of course, Evan and I are self-funding eViRa Health, so it gives us the freedom to do things exactly how we envision them. Of course, it helps that the marketing consulting business that we have, it's not require like large capital expenditures, right? So that's very different if you're in biotech or especially, any kind of hardware, developing any kind of hardware, right? So that's very intensive in terms of finances. So financial risk is one. And another area where I see a lot of entrepreneurs fail is in focusing exclusively for too long on technology and not the potential uses or users of it. So, what I'm talking about is engineers kind of toiling away on something they believe is cool and needed without making sure there's a market for it or real need out there. And, don't get me wrong, as I said, I'm an engineer myself, so I really can relate.
Yep, me too.
At the end of the day, as an entrepreneur, you want to be developing products, services, things that are needed out there. So the earlier you can start getting feedback from your potential users and get some, much needed feedback on the usability of your product, on the importance of it, the need, etc. I think the better. So the last thing you want is to develop something in vacuum for 2 or 3 years and then find out that the market had moved on or there's just no need for it out there. So that's probably, so in a way it's timing also. So I've seen statistics and I think timing is one of the more important factors why new businesses fail. So it's related to timing, but I'm not specifically talking about how timely your product is. It's just checking with your potential audience whether you're developing the right thing.
And it's basically about getting feedback and listening.
That's always good. So, but choosing the right people to get the feedback from. So understanding, I love to work on cool technology. I used to develop really cool things, right? So, but the key is to know exactly what your audience is or what your desired audience is going to be, and then understand what their pain points are and what they're really struggling with, and then solving for that.
Irma, where are you looking to take your business, say, in the next 5 years?
With our business only about a year old, just a little over a year old, it's really kind of hard to look out 5 years. But Evan and I do envision becoming a premier marketing consultancy and go-to choice for startups and solopreneurs and also established entrepreneurial companies that are doing great things in healthcare, digital health, and life sciences. So we want to continue to work with passionate people who care about their work and are looking to make the world a better place. So that's kind of our general vision, is to continue to do what we love and make a difference and help others in this space.
Irma, how can people connect with you?
Well, absolutely. So probably the easiest way is to go to eViRa Health. So that's just EV for Evan, IR for Irma, and then A. So eViRa Health. You can find a little bit more about Evan and myself and some of our collaborators, and there's all the ways to our social media presence, etc. And also, I'd really encourage people to connect with me on LinkedIn and follow me on Twitter and engage in some of the great conversations that are happening on those platforms.
Great, and I'm gonna post all that information onto the show notes so people can just click right on it and get right to you.
Great, thank you. That sounds great.
Irma, do you have any parting words of wisdom that you'd like to share with the audience?
I truly believe that there is a unique and valuable contribution that each of us can make in this world. It took me a long time to find my own voice and the courage to speak my truth. Now that I've experienced what that feels like and what it feels to live my values, I'd like to never go back. But I recognize that not everyone can immediately do that, whether because of family responsibilities, financial pressures, or caregiving obligations. And I certainly had been there myself for more than 25 years, feeling like, I just have to put one foot in front of the other and my passions have to wait. So I understand, but I would really encourage others to explore their passion in the work and they seek ways to do that feeds their soul.
Wonderful. Irma, thank you so much for sharing your time and your wisdom. I really enjoyed having you on the show.
Thank you very much, Avraham, for the invitation. It's been a blast, and I look forward to continuing being in touch with you and getting to know your audience.